Richard Halbrook wrapped his fingers around the breathing tube and squeezed. Not enough to kill, just enough to send a message. He leaned so close his lips nearly touched the Admiral's ear. "I cut your brakes, Nate. I watched the crash footage 3 times, and I enjoyed it." The heart monitor spiked. 8 beats. Halbrook smiled. "Oh, you heard that, didn't you? Doesn't matter. No one believes a vegetable." He released the tube, straightened his tie, and walked out like he owned the building. He didn't know a 26-year-old nurse was standing behind the curtain, shaking, with her hand over her mouth, recording every word on her phone. If you want to follow this story to the very end, subscribe to my channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Dispatch said it was a single vehicle crash on Route 110, just outside Arlington. Government plates, high priority passenger, no other vehicles involved. The paramedics who arrived first said the scene didn't make sense. A black armored SUV had gone straight into a concrete median divider at highway speed. No skid marks, no swerve pattern, no sign that the driver had tried to stop, tried to turn, tried to do anything at all. The airbags deployed, the windshield shattered inward, and in the back seat, still buckled in, was a 61-year-old man in a dark suit with blood running down the left side of his face. His military ID read, Admiral Nathaniel Cole, United States Navy. 32 years of service, 4 combat deployments, former SEAL team commander. Decorated more times than most generals twice his age. The kind of man who had walked through gunfire in 6 countries and never once ended up in a hospital bed. Until tonight. They airlifted him to Georgetown Memorial, a civilian trauma center just across the river. By the time the helicopter landed on the roof, 3 surgeons were already scrubbed in and waiting. The Pentagon had made 1 phone call. That was all it took. At 1:15 a.m., the lead neurosurgeon stepped out of the operating room. He pulled off his gloves slowly, the way doctors do when the news isn't going to be good. He looked at the 2 uniformed officers standing in the hallway and said 5 words that would define the next 6 months. He's alive, but he's gone. Severe traumatic brain injury, massive swelling in the frontal and temporal lobes, no voluntary motor function, no response to pain, light, or voice. The scans showed catastrophic damage. The prognosis was devastating. Coma, deep, possibly permanent. By sunrise, the Pentagon released a 3-line statement. Admiral Nathaniel Cole had been involved in a single vehicle accident due to suspected mechanical failure. He was receiving the best medical care available. The Department of Defense expressed its thoughts and prayers. And that was supposed to be the end of the story. A tragic accident, a fallen hero, a nation mourns, move on. Except there was one person in that hospital who didn't move on. One person who didn't accept the story the way everyone else did. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 26 years old. She had graduated from nursing school 14 months ago. She had been working in the ICU at Georgetown Memorial for exactly 9 weeks. She was quiet, she was careful, and she had a habit that annoyed some of the senior nurses on the floor. She watched the monitors too closely, not just glanced at them during rounds, not just checked the numbers when an alarm went off. Emily Carter sat with her patients and watched the screens the way some people watch the ocean. Constantly, patiently, looking for patterns that didn't belong. It was a strange skill for a rookie nurse, but it was about to change everything. Emily was assigned to Admiral Cole's room on her 2nd night shift after the crash. The head nurse, a woman named Donna Briggs who had been running the ICU for 19 years, pulled her aside before the shift started. "This patient is high profile," Donna said. "Military, government. There will be people coming and going who outrank everyone in this building. You do your job. You check his vitals. You monitor his lines. You do not engage with visitors. You do not answer questions about his condition. You refer everything to Dr. Weston. Understood?" Emily nodded. Understood. And Emily, Donna added, lowering her voice, don't get curious. Curiosity in the ICU gets people in trouble. Emily walked into room 814 at exactly 8 p.m. that night. She expected to see what she always saw with deep coma patients. Stillness. Machines doing the work of living. A body that was present, but a mind that was somewhere else entirely. And at first, that's exactly what it looked like. Admiral Cole lay flat on his back, intubated, IV lines running into both arms, a cervical collar stabilizing his neck, EEG leads attached to his scalp. The ventilator hissed in a steady rhythm. The heart monitor beeped with the kind of slow, even consistency that usually meant one thing. The brain was offline. Emily pulled up a chair. She opened his chart on the tablet. She read through the surgical notes, the imaging reports, the neurology consult. Everything pointed in one direction. This man was not coming back. She looked at the monitor. Heart rate, 58. Steady. Oxygen saturation, 97%. Steady. Blood pressure, 118/74. Steady. Respiratory rate perfectly synchronized with the ventilator. Emily frowned. She didn't say anything. She didn't write anything down. But something in the back of her mind, the part of her brain that Donna Briggs would have told her to shut off, that part whispered a single word. Too perfect. She had seen coma patients before. Not many, but enough. And the one thing they all had in common was variability. The body, when the brain goes dark, doesn't run like a clock. It drifts. Heart rate wanders. Oxygen dips and recovers. Blood pressure fluctuates with position changes, with medication cycles, with the random firings of a nervous system that has lost its conductor. Admiral Cole's numbers didn't drift. They sat on those screens like they had been placed there on purpose. Emily told herself she was imagining things. She was new. She was tired. She was reading patterns into noise. She checked his IV drip rates. She adjusted his head position slightly to prevent pressure sores. She noted everything in the chart. And then she did something small, something instinctive. She dropped her pen. It clattered on the tile floor, loud in the silence of the room. She watched the monitor as she bent to pick it up. Nothing. No spike. No flicker. Not even a one-beat variation. A healthy, sleeping person would have reacted to that sound. A coma patient might not, but the autonomic nervous system usually registers sudden noise with at least a micro-fluctuation. Admiral Cole's body registered nothing. Zero response. That was wrong in the opposite direction. Too stable, too controlled, like someone had heard the sound and deliberately held everything still. Emily finished her shift without saying a word about it. The next night she came back. This time she brought a small flashlight, standard equipment, nothing unusual. During her normal assessment, she lifted his left eyelid and shone the light across his pupil. The pupil constricted, normal, but the speed of the constriction was wrong. It was too fast, too precise. In a deep coma with the kind of brain damage his scans showed, pupillary response should be sluggish, delayed, or absent altogether. His pupils reacted like those of a man who was awake and looking at a light. Emily's hand trembled slightly. She turned off the flashlight and stepped back. She looked at his face, perfectly still, not a single muscle twitching, not a flicker behind the eyelids, nothing. But his pupils had betrayed him. For the next 3 hours, Emily sat in that room and watched. She watched the monitors with a kind of attention that borders on obsession. She cataloged every number, every rhythm, every tiny variation. And she found something that made her blood run cold. Every 47 minutes, Admiral Cole's heart rate increased by exactly 2 beats per minute, held for 90 seconds, then returned to baseline. Every single time. Like clockwork. No coma patient does that. No human body does that without conscious control. Emily pulled out her phone and opened the calculator app. She started tracking the intervals. 47 minutes, 47 minutes, 47 minutes. She thought about what Donna had told her. Don't get curious. She thought about what the neurologist had written in the chart. Deep coma, no voluntary response, prognosis poor. She thought about the armed guard sitting outside the door who checked her badge every time she entered the room. And she thought about a man lying in a bed, alone, in the dark, with a secret he couldn't speak. On the third night, the visitor came. Emily was charting at the nurse's station when she heard the elevator doors open at the far end of the hallway. It was 10:30 p.m., well past visiting hours. She looked up and saw two men in dark suits walking toward room 814. Between them was a third man, older, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than Emily's monthly rent. The guard outside the door stood up straight. He didn't check their IDs. He didn't ask for badges. He simply stepped aside. Emily recognized the older man from the news, Deputy Defense Secretary Richard Holbrook. She had seen his face on television 2 days ago, standing behind the Secretary of Defense at a press conference about the Admiral's accident. He had looked appropriately somber. He had called Admiral Cole a national treasure. Now he was walking into a coma patient's room at 10:30 at night with no medical reason and no prior authorization on the chart. Emily stood up from the station and walked toward the room. The two men in suits positioned themselves outside the door, flanking the guard. One of them held up his hand as she approached. Deputy Secretary Holbrook is visiting the patient, he said. He'll be 5 minutes. I need to check the patient's vitals, Emily said. 5 minutes. Emily didn't argue. She stepped back, but she didn't go back to the station. She stood in the hallway, 15 feet from the door, and waited. Through the glass partition, she could see Holbrook standing over the bed. He wasn't holding the Admiral's hand. He wasn't praying. He wasn't doing any of the things people do when they visit someone they care about in the hospital. He was leaning down, close to the Admiral's face, and he was talking. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she could see the monitor from where she stood, and what she saw made her grip the wall. Admiral Cole's heart rate jumped. Not randomly, not wildly, 6 beats, exactly 6 beats above baseline. It held there for the duration of Holbrook's whispered words. Then the moment Holbrook straightened up and stepped back, it dropped, back to 58. Precisely. Emily stopped breathing. That was not a neurological reflex. That was not a random fluctuation. That was a man hearing something that made his heart pound and holding it down with the kind of iron discipline that only decades of combat training could produce. Holbrook left the room 4 minutes later. He walked past Emily without looking at her. The two suits followed. The elevator doors closed. Emily waited 60 seconds. Then she walked into room 814. She stood at the bedside and looked down at Admiral Cole's face. Still, silent. The ventilator hissed. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. She leaned close, not to his ear, to the space beside his bed where no microphone, no camera, no sensor could pick up a whisper. "Sir," she said barely above a breath, "if you can hear me, don't react. Don't change anything. I just need you to know that someone in this room is paying attention." The heart monitor flickered. One single beat. One extra contraction that lasted a fraction of a second and then vanished back into the steady line of 58 beats per minute. Emily felt tears pressing behind her eyes. She blinked them away. She straightened up. She adjusted his blanket. She checked his IV line. She walked out of the room, nodded to the guard, and went back to the nurse's station. She sat down. She opened a blank document on the charting system, and for the next 20 minutes, she wrote everything she had observed in precise, clinical, unassailable language. Every number, every interval, every deviation, every correlation with Holbrook's visit. She saved it in the patient's electronic medical record under a clinical note titled Neurological Observation, Anomalous Findings. Then she did something she had never done before in her short career. She called Dr. Raymond Weston at home. It was 11:15 p.m. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Dr. Weston, this is Emily Carter, Night shift, ICU. I'm sorry to call at this hour. What's wrong? Is it the Admiral? His vitals are anomalous, doctor. I've documented everything in the chart. I think we may be looking at a misdiagnosis. There was a long pause. She could hear him sitting up in bed. Emily, the neurology team reviewed his imaging. The scans are definitive. The scans show injury, sir. I'm not disputing that, but his physiological responses are inconsistent with the level of unconsciousness we've diagnosed. His pupillary response is too fast. His cardiac rhythm shows pattern variation at fixed intervals. And tonight, during an unauthorized visitor interaction, his heart rate responded to external auditory stimulus in a controlled, repeatable manner. Another pause, longer this time. Who was the visitor? Deputy Defense Secretary Halbrook. The silence that followed was different from the others. It wasn't the silence of a man thinking. It was the silence of a man deciding how much trouble he was willing to invite into his life. Document everything, Dr. Weston said finally. Time-stamped, double-saved. I'll review the chart first thing in the morning. Doctor, if this patient is conscious and unable to communicate, we have a legal and ethical obligation to pursue a locked-in syndrome workup. If we don't, and something happens to him during a transfer to a military facility, we are liable. She heard him exhale slowly. You've been a nurse for how long, Emily? 14 months, sir. You sound like you've been doing this for 20 years. I'm just reading the numbers, doctor. The numbers don't lie. He hung up. Emily set the phone down. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of what she now believed was true. Admiral Nathaniel Cole, one of the most decorated military officers in the United States, was lying in a hospital bed, fully conscious, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to the man who had tried to kill him whisper threats into his ear. And until 5 minutes ago, nobody in the world knew it except her. She looked through the glass at room 814. The machines hummed. The lights were low. The man in the bed was perfectly still. But he was in there. She was sure of it now. And she was going to make sure he didn't disappear before the truth came out. Emily pulled up the hospital's federal reporting system on the computer. She had never used it before. She had only seen it demonstrated once during orientation, but she found the form she was looking for. Federal Neurological Anomaly Report, recommended when clinical findings suggest a discrepancy between diagnostic imaging and observed neurological function in any patient under government oversight or military jurisdiction. Filing this form would trigger an automatic review by an independent military medical board. It would put a legal hold on any transfer order. It would create a paper trail that couldn't be quietly deleted. It would also put a target on the back of a 26-year-old nurse with 14 months of experience who was about to challenge the official narrative of every powerful person involved in this case. Emily's finger hovered over the submit button. She thought about Donna's warning, "Don't get curious." She thought about the two men in dark suits who hadn't even blinked when she approached. She thought about Richard Holbrook's face as he leaned over that bed and whispered to a man the world believed couldn't hear. And she thought about the heart monitor, that single, solitary flicker. One beat, one moment of contact between a trapped man and the only person who was watching closely enough to see it. She pressed submit. The form went through at 11:58 p.m., and somewhere in a dark room at the Pentagon, a notification appeared on a screen that very few people had access to. The clock had started. Emily Carter didn't know it yet, but she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. Not because she was wrong about what she had seen, because she was right. The Federal Anomaly Report hit the Pentagon's medical oversight system at 11:58 p.m. By 6 a.m., 3 people had already seen it. By 7 a.m., one of those people had made a phone call to Richard Holbrook. Emily knew this because when she walked into the hospital at 7:45 p.m. for her next shift, Donna Briggs was waiting for her at the staff entrance. Not at the nurse's station, not in the break room, at the door, like she'd been standing there for a while. "What did you do?" Donna said. Emily kept walking. I filed a clinical observation report. You filed a federal neurological anomaly report on a patient who has been evaluated by 3 board-certified neurologists, 2 military physicians, and the head of our own neurology department. You've been a nurse for 14 months. 15 now, Emily said. Donna grabbed her arm. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her. Emily, I'm not your enemy, but you need to understand something. That report triggered a review. The Pentagon called the hospital administrator at 5 a.m. The administrator called Dr. Weston. Dr. Weston called me. Everyone is asking the same question. Who is Emily Carter, and why is she contradicting 6 doctors? Emily looked at Donna's hand on her arm, then looked her in the eyes. Did anyone ask what I actually wrote in the report? Donna hesitated. I read it. And? Donna let go of her arm. She didn't answer the question. She just said, Room 814. Your shift starts in 15 minutes. Be careful. Emily walked to the locker room, changed into her scrubs, and clipped her badge to her chest. She checked her phone. No messages from Dr. Weston. No messages from anyone. She slipped the phone into her pocket and headed for the ICU. The guard outside room 814 was different tonight. Younger, military. He didn't just glance at her badge. He wrote down her name and the time she entered. Emily walked into the room and closed the door behind her. Admiral Cole lay exactly as he had every night. Still, silent. The ventilator pushed air into his lungs with mechanical precision. The heart monitor beeped at 58 beats per minute. Emily pulled up the chair. She sat down. She opened his chart on the tablet and scrolled through the day's notes, and her stomach dropped. There was a new entry, timed at 2:15 p.m. that afternoon, signed by a Dr. Marcus Webb, military neurologist, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The note read, Patient reviewed via telemedicine consultation. Findings consistent with prior diagnosis. Deep comatose state. No evidence of locked-in syndrome. Recommend expedited transfer to Walter Reed for long-term care in military oversight. Transfer authorized for 48 hours from this entry. Emily read it twice, then a third time. 48 hours. They were moving him in 48 hours. She set the tablet down and looked at the Admiral's face. She leaned forward in the chair until her mouth was inches from the edge of the bed. They're coming for you, she whispered. 48 hours. I filed the report, but they pushed through a military consult to override it. They're transferring you to Walter Reed. The heart monitor held steady. 58, 58, 58, then 59. Just one beat. Barely a shift. But Emily saw it, and she knew what it meant. He heard her. I need more evidence, she said, keeping her voice below the range of the room's ambient microphone. The report alone isn't enough. They've got 6 doctors saying you're gone. I need something they can't argue with. Something clinical. Something on camera. The monitor returned to 58. Emily sat back. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and opened a medical reference app. She searched for one term, locked-in syndrome diagnostic protocol. The standard test was straightforward, controlled stimulus, verbal command, measurable voluntary response. If a patient could produce a repeatable, intentional movement on command, it was proof of consciousness, regardless of what imaging showed. The problem was that she couldn't run this test alone. She needed a physician present. She needed it documented, and she needed it done before that 48-hour clock ran out. Emily stood up and walked out of the room. She went straight to the hospital's internal phone and dialed Dr. Weston's office. Voicemail. She dialed his cell. Voicemail. She dialed a third time. He picked up on the second ring. Emily, I can't talk right now. Doctor, they've scheduled a transfer in 48 hours. A military neurologist overrode my report with a telemedicine consult. He never physically examined the patient. Silence. Dr. Weston, A telemedicine consult cannot legally override an in-person observation for a locked-in syndrome evaluation. You know that. I know that. If we request a formal bedside assessment before the transfer, they have to grant it. It's federal patient protection law. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, heavy, conflicted. Emily, do you understand what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to challenge a military medical decision on a patient the Pentagon has already claimed jurisdiction over. I'm asking you to examine your patient, doctor. That's all. Another pause. She could almost hear him thinking, weighing his career against his conscience. I'll be there at 6 a.m., he said, before the day shift takes over. We'll do a bedside neuro evaluation. If I see what you're describing, I'll request a formal hold on the transfer. If I don't, Emily, you need to let this go. Understood. He hung up. Emily looked at the clock on the wall. 8:52 p.m. She had 9 hours. She walked back to room 814 and sat down in the chair beside Admiral Cole's bed. She opened the tablet and began documenting everything again. Every vital sign, every micro fluctuation, time-stamped down to the second. At 9:30 p.m., the door opened. Emily looked up and felt her chest tighten. Richard Holbrook walked in. No escort this time. No men in dark suits. Just him, alone. He closed the door behind him and stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the Admiral the way a man looks at a problem he's already solved. Then he turned to Emily. You're the nurse who filed the report. Emily didn't stand. She kept her eyes on the tablet. I'm the nurse assigned to this patient, sir. You filed a federal anomaly report suggesting that Admiral Cole may be conscious. I filed a clinical observation noting inconsistencies between his physiological data and his documented diagnosis. That's a standard nursing responsibility. Holbrook walked slowly around the bed until he was standing directly beside her. She could smell his cologne. Expensive. Sharp. It filled the small space between them. Do you know who I am? He asked. Deputy Defense Secretary Holbrook. And do you know what happens when a 26-year-old nurse with no specialty certification files a federal report that contradicts 6 physicians, delays a military transfer, and creates a paper trail that ends up on the desks of people whose names you will never know? Emily looked up at him. Her heart was hammering. She could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, behind her eyes. But she kept her face still. The Admiral had taught her something over the past 3 nights without saying a single word. Control is not the absence of fear. Control is fear held perfectly in place. I know what happens when a patient's rights are violated, sir. I documented what I observed. If the observation is wrong, the review will confirm it and the transfer will proceed. If the observation is correct, then this patient is conscious and has legal protections that supersede military jurisdiction. Holbrook stared at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek twitched. You're making a very big mistake, he said quietly. That's possible, Emily replied, but it's documented. Holbrook turned back to the bed. He looked down at the Admiral's face, and then he did something that made Emily's blood freeze in her veins. He laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, a soft, almost sad laugh, like a man remembering a private joke. Nate, he said, shaking his head, even unconscious, you're still causing me problems. He straightened his coat and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at Emily. I'll have a word with your administrator in the morning. You might want to start thinking about your next career. He left. The door closed with a soft click. Emily sat frozen for 15 seconds. Then she looked at the heart monitor. Admiral Cole's heart rate was 64, 6 beats above baseline. Exactly 6. The same controlled elevation she had seen during Holbrook's first visit. He had heard everything, every word, every threat, and he was angry. Emily stood up and moved to the bedside. She leaned down close to where no device could pick up her voice. Dr. Weston is coming at 6 a.m. We're going to do a formal bedside evaluation. When he gives you a command, you need to respond. Something visible, something undeniable. A finger movement, a change in breathing, anything voluntary. Can you do that? The monitor held at 64. Then it dropped. 62, 60, 59, 58. A controlled descent, like a man slowly exhaling after holding his breath through an explosion. Emily felt tears burning in her eyes for the second time that week. She blinked them away and whispered, "I'll take that as a yes." At 10:15 p.m., Emily left the room to get a cup of coffee from the break room. When she came back 3 minutes later, the guard was standing inside the room, not outside. He was holding the bedside camera, the one Emily had positioned 2 nights ago, under the excuse of equipment recalibration. "This camera isn't standard ICU equipment," the guard said. Emily set her coffee down. "It's a supplementary monitoring device. I placed it there for patient safety documentation. It's been removed. Orders from the attending physician's office." "Which attending physician?" The guard didn't answer. He walked out of the room with the camera under his arm. Emily stood alone in the room. Her primary piece of evidence had just been confiscated. The recording she had hoped would capture Halbrook's threats was gone. But not all of it. Emily reached into her scrub pocket and felt the outline of her phone. 3 nights ago, when Halbrook had squeezed the breathing tube, when he had whispered about the brakes, about enjoying the crash footage, Emily had been behind the curtain. Her phone had been recording. She had transferred the audio file to a personal cloud account that same night, encrypted, password protected, backed up twice. They could take the camera. They could take her badge. They could take her job. They couldn't take what was already out of the building. At 11 p.m., when something changed, Emily was charting when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the heavy, deliberate steps of the guard, not the click of Halbrook's expensive shoes. Quick steps, purposeful. A woman's shoes on linoleum. A woman Emily had never seen before walked up to the nurse's station. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back tight, no makeup. She wore a plain black blazer and carried a slim leather folder. "I need to see room 814's chart," the woman said. No greeting, no introduction. Emily looked at her badge. It read, "Dr. Sandra Voss, Department of Defense, Office of Medical Oversight." "Are you the attending physician?" Emily asked. "I'm the reviewing authority for the transfer order. I need the chart." Patient charts at this facility require attending physician authorization for release to external parties. "I can contact Dr. Weston for you." Dr. Voss opened the leather folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the counter. It was a signed authorization from the hospital administrator granting the Department of Defense full access to Admiral Cole's medical records. Emily read it. It was legitimate, signed, dated, time-stamped 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, 5 hours before Emily's shift started. They had been planning this all day. Emily pulled up the electronic chart and turned the screen toward Dr. Voss. She watched the woman's eyes as she scrolled through the records, past the surgical notes, past the imaging reports, past the neurology consults. She stopped at Emily's clinical observation note, the one that had triggered the federal report. Dr. Voss read it slowly. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved back to the beginning and read it again. "You wrote this?" she asked without looking up. "Yes." "You observed patterned cardiac variation at 47-minute intervals?" "Yes." "And you correlated a 6-beat elevation with an identified external stimulus?" "Yes." Deputy Secretary Halbrook's visit. Dr. Voss closed the chart. She looked at Emily for the first time, really looked at her. Not with hostility, not with skepticism, with something Emily hadn't seen from anyone in this building since she filed that report. Curiosity. "Walk with me," Dr. Voss said. They walked down the hall, past the guard, past the elevators, to a small consultation room at the end of the corridor. Dr. Voss closed the door and sat down across from Emily. "How long have you been a nurse?" 15 months. And you identified a potential locked-in syndrome presentation that 3 neurologists missed? They weren't looking for it. They trusted the imaging. I was watching the patient. Dr. Voss opened her folder and pulled out a second document. She laid it flat on the table. It was the transfer order. Emily could see Admiral Cole's name, the destination, the date, the authorizing signature, Halbrook's signature. This transfer was initiated by the Deputy Defense Secretary's office, Dr. Voss said, not by the medical team, not by the Pentagon's Health Services Division, by Halbrook directly. Emily said nothing. She waited. That's unusual, Dr. Voss continued. Deputy secretaries don't typically involve themselves in patient transfer logistics. It's beneath their operational scope. Unless they have a personal interest in where the patient ends up, Emily said. Dr. Voss looked at her sharply. Be very careful with what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that on 3 consecutive nights, Deputy Secretary Halbrook visited a coma patient after hours, without medical authorization on the chart. And during each visit, the patient's cardiac rhythm responded in a controlled, repeatable pattern consistent with conscious awareness. I have that data documented. I have the timestamps, and I have a physician arriving at 6 a.m. to conduct a formal bedside evaluation. Dr. Voss was quiet for a long time. She looked at the transfer order. She looked at Emily. She looked at the wall. If Dr. Weston's evaluation confirms your observations, she said slowly, I can place a medical hold on the transfer pending a full locked-in syndrome workup. That would take the decision out of Halbrook's hands entirely. And if it doesn't confirm, Emily asked, then you filed a report in good faith based on clinical observation, and your professional record remains clean. But the transfer proceeds, and Admiral Cole goes to Walter Reed by Friday. Emily nodded. 6 a.m., room 814. Dr. Voss stood up. She paused at the door. Miss Carter, yes? If you're right about this, you've done something that most people in this building wouldn't have the courage to do. And if you're wrong, you've made a lot of powerful people very angry for nothing. She paused. Either way, you should know that Halbrook called the administrator again 30 minutes ago. He wants you removed from the patient's care team, effective immediately. Emily felt her stomach tighten. On what grounds? Insubordination and clinical overreach. Can he do that? The administrator is considering it. You have until morning. Dr. Voss left. Emily sat alone in the consultation room. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Her hands were flat on the table, trembling. She had 8 hours left. 8 hours before Dr. Weston's evaluation. 8 hours before Halbrook's removal order could take effect. 8 hours before the transfer clock hit its 48-hour deadline. She stood up, straightened her scrubs, and walked back to room 814. The guard looked at her badge. He wrote down the time, 11:47 p.m. Emily sat down in the chair beside Admiral Cole's bed. She picked up the tablet. She began charting again. Every number, every beat, every breath. At 2 a.m., the phone at the nurse's station rang. The night charge nurse answered it, then walked over to Emily. That was administration, she said quietly. They're reviewing your assignment. You may be pulled from this patient in the morning. Emily nodded. She didn't stop charting. At 3:30 a.m., the guard's radio crackled. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. Emily watched him through the glass. His face changed. He looked back at her through the partition, then spoke quickly into the radio and walked away down the corridor. For the first time in 3 nights, Emily was alone with Admiral Cole with no one watching. She moved fast. She reached into the supply cart beside the bed and pulled out a neurological assessment kit. Standard equipment, nothing unusual. She selected a blunt-tip stimulator and moved to the head of the bed. Admiral, she whispered, I'm going to apply a stimulus behind your left ear. It's a standard nerve response test. If you can feel it, I need you to change your breathing pattern. One deliberate change, that's all. She pressed the stimulator to the mastoid process behind his ear. A firm, precise pressure. 3 seconds passed. The ventilator hissed. The monitor beeped. Then his breathing shifted. The ventilator rhythm stayed the same, but his chest movement changed. One breath, slightly deeper than the mechanical cycle. Not fighting the machine, working with it, adjusting within the pattern to produce a difference that was invisible to anyone who wasn't standing right there. Watching his chest rise and fall with the focus of someone who had spent 3 nights learning the exact rhythm of this man's borrowed breath. Emily removed the stimulator. His breathing returned to synchronization within 4 seconds. She wrote the time in the chart, 3:33 a.m. She documented the stimulus, the response, and the latency period. Then she sat back in the chair and waited for dawn. At 5:45 a.m., she heard the elevator doors open. 2 sets of footsteps. Dr. Weston appeared at the door of room 814, with Dr. Sandra Voss 1 step behind him. Dr. Weston looked at Emily. His face was drawn. He hadn't slept. "Show me," he said. Emily stood up and handed him the tablet with every observation, every data point, every correlation she had collected over 72 hours. Dr. Weston read in silence for 4 minutes. Dr. Voss stood by the door with her arms crossed. When he finished, Dr. Weston set the tablet down and looked at the man in the bed. He put on his gloves. He pulled a penlight from his coat pocket. "Admiral Cole," he said clearly, loudly enough that there was no ambiguity. "My name is Dr. Raymond Weston. I am your attending physician. If you can hear my voice, I need you to demonstrate a voluntary response." The room was silent. The ventilator hissed. The monitor beeped. "On my count, Admiral, if you can hear me, I want you to move your right index finger. 1 deliberate movement." Dr. Weston held his hand near the Admiral's right hand. Emily watched the monitor. Dr. Voss watched from the door. 1. Nothing. 2. Nothing. 3. Admiral Nathaniel Cole's right index finger lifted 1 centimeter off the mattress, held for 2 full seconds, and lowered back down. Dr. Weston stepped back from the bed. His face was white. Dr. Voss uncrossed her arms. Emily Carter didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The man in the bed had just spoken louder than anyone in that hospital had spoken in days, and he hadn't said a single word. Dr. Weston didn't move for a full 10 seconds after the finger lifted. He stood there with his gloved hands at his sides, staring at Admiral Cole's right hand like it had just pulled a trigger. Then he turned to Emily, and the look on his face wasn't gratitude, it was fear. "Close the door," he said to Dr. Voss. She closed it. Dr. Weston pulled his gloves off and dropped them in the waste bin. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs to steady them and looked at the monitor, then at the Admiral, then back at Emily. "How long have you known?" 3 days, Emily said, "since my second shift with him." 3 days. He repeated it like the words tasted wrong. "This man has been conscious in this bed for potentially 5 days, and we've been treating him like a corpse." "You were treating the imaging," Emily said. "The imaging was real. The brain injury is real, but the level of consciousness doesn't match the diagnosis." Dr. Voss stepped forward. "Dr. Weston, I need you to listen to me carefully. What just happened in this room changes the legal status of this patient immediately. A voluntary motor response to verbal command in a diagnosed coma patient constitutes evidence of consciousness. Under federal medical protection statutes, no transfer can proceed until a full locked-in syndrome evaluation is completed by an independent neurological team. That evaluation takes a minimum of 72 hours. Dr. Weston nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm placing a medical hold on the transfer, effective right now, 5:53 a.m. I'll file it with the oversight board within the hour. But you need to understand what's going to come next." "Halbrook," Dr. Weston said. "Halbrook," Dr. Voss confirmed. He initiated this transfer personally. When he finds out it's been blocked, he's going to come here. And he's going to bring people with authority that outranks mine. Emily spoke up. Then we need to do the full evaluation now, before he gets here, before anyone can interfere. Dr. Weston shook his head. A full locked-in syndrome workup requires a neurologist, an EMG technician, and at minimum 4 hours of structured testing. I can't pull that together at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. Then find someone who can, Emily said. Dr. Voss pulled out her phone. I know a civilian neurologist at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Catherine Marsh. She's published more on locked-in syndrome than anyone on the East Coast. If I call her now, she can be here by 10 a.m. Do it, Dr. Weston said. Dr. Voss stepped into the hallway to make the call. Dr. Weston moved to the bedside and looked down at Admiral Cole. The Admiral's eyes were closed. The ventilator hissed. The monitor beeped at 58. But everything was different now. The man in the bed was no longer a patient to be managed. He was a witness who couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't defend himself, but who was alive and aware inside a body that the most powerful people in Washington wanted to bury in a military facility where no one would ever think to look for the truth. Dr. Weston leaned down. Admiral Cole, I owe you an apology. We should have caught this sooner. We're going to protect you now. The monitor ticked up one beat, 59, then back to 58. At 6:12 a.m., the day shift arrived. Donna Briggs walked onto the floor, saw Dr. Weston standing outside room 814 with Dr. Voss, and stopped in her tracks. She looked at Emily, who was still inside the room charting. What happened? Donna asked. Dr. Weston told her. He kept it brief. Voluntary motor response, confirmed consciousness, medical hold on transfer, independent evaluation incoming. Donna listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked through the glass at Emily, then back at Dr. Weston. She was right, Donna said quietly. She was right from the beginning, Dr. Weston replied. At 7:15 a.m., the hospital administrator, a man named Gerald Tate, arrived on the ICU floor. He was not alone. A military attorney in uniform walked beside him, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind them was a second man in civilian clothes who didn't introduce himself, but stood close to the door like he owned the hallway. Tate pulled Dr. Weston aside. Emily couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see it through the glass. Tate was talking fast. Dr. Weston was shaking his head. The military attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. Dr. Weston read it and his face changed. He walked back into the room. He looked at Emily. They're invoking military medical jurisdiction. The attorney has a signed order from the Judge Advocate General's office authorizing immediate transfer regardless of civilian medical holds. Emily felt the floor shift under her. Can they do that? If the patient is active military and the order is signed by the JAG, civilian hospital holds can be overridden in the interest of national security. He paused. They're claiming the Admiral's presence in a civilian facility is a security risk. His presence here is the only thing keeping him safe. Dr. Weston looked at Dr. Voss, who had just walked back in. Sandra, they've got a JAG order. Dr. Voss read the document. Her eyes moved across the page twice. Then she set it down and said, This order was filed at 4 a.m. this morning, before our evaluation, before the finger movement, before any confirmed evidence of consciousness. So, the military attorney said from the doorway, so this order was drafted based on the diagnosis of a patient in a persistent vegetative state. That diagnosis has now been clinically contradicted. The legal basis for this order no longer applies. The attorney stepped into the room. Dr. Voss, the order is signed and valid. The diagnosis will be reviewed at Walter Reed. By whom? Emily said. Everyone turned to look at her. The attorney, Tate, Dr. Weston, Dr. Voss. A 26-year-old nurse who had just interrupted a military legal officer. By whom? She repeated. Who at Walter Reed will conduct the evaluation? Because the military neurologist who reviewed this patient yesterday did it by telemedicine. He never touched the patient. He never entered this room. And his consult was ordered by Deputy Secretary Halbrook, who has visited this patient 3 times after hours without medical authorization, and who, 20 minutes ago, was recorded on this hospital's security system threatening me in this hallway. The room went silent. The attorney looked at Tate. Tate looked at Dr. Weston. Dr. Weston looked at the floor. Emily continued, "If this patient is transferred to a facility where the oversight chain reports to the same man who ordered the transfer, that's not medical care. That's custody. And if this patient is conscious, which he is, that's unlawful detention of a federal officer." The attorney closed his briefcase. "I'll need to consult with my office." He walked out. Tate lingered. He looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not admiration, something closer to disbelief. Like he was watching someone walk across a frozen lake and couldn't decide if the ice was holding or about to crack. "Miss Carter," he said, "you understand that your employment at this hospital is subject to administrative review." "Yes, sir." "And you're prepared to accept the consequences of your actions today?" "I'm prepared to testify under oath about everything I've observed in this room over the past 4 days, sir. Every vital sign, every visitor, every word." Tate left without responding. At 8:30 a.m., Emily's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "You should consider whether this career is worth it. Things can be lost that aren't easily recovered." She stared at the message for 30 seconds. Then she screenshotted it, uploaded it to the same encrypted cloud account where she had stored the audio recording, and deleted the text from her phone. At 9 a.m., something happened that nobody expected. The guard outside room 814 was replaced. The young military officer who had been logging names and times was relieved by 2 U.S. Marshals in plain clothes. They showed their badges to Dr. Weston and took positions on either side of the door. Dr. Voss walked up to them. "Who sent you?" "Office of the Inspector General," the taller marshal said. "We received an anonymous tip this morning regarding potential federal crimes involving a patient at this facility. We're here to secure the patient pending investigation." Emily felt her breath catch. An anonymous tip. She hadn't made any calls outside the hospital. She hadn't contacted law enforcement. She hadn't told anyone except Dr. Weston and Dr. Voss. Dr. Voss pulled Emily into the consultation room. "Did you contact the Inspector General?" "No, I don't even know how to contact the Inspector General." "Someone did. Someone who knows what's happening in that room. Someone who has access to information that goes beyond your clinical observations." Emily thought about it, and then a chill ran down her spine. "The audio," she said. "What audio?" "The first night, when Halbrook came to the room alone. He squeezed the Admiral's breathing tube. He said he cut the brakes. He said he enjoyed watching the crash footage. I was behind the curtain. I recorded it on my phone." Dr. Voss stared at her. "You have a recording of the Deputy Defense Secretary confessing to attempted murder. I uploaded it to a cloud account that night, encrypted. Who else has access to that account?" "Nobody, just me." Dr. Voss sat down slowly. "Then someone else knows. Someone inside the building. Someone who's been watching this situation develop and decided to act." At 9:45 a.m., Emily found out who. The elevator doors opened and a woman walked onto the ICU floor. She was in her late 50s, tall, silver-haired, wearing a dark blue suit that fit like it had been tailored that morning. She walked past the marshals without stopping. They didn't challenge her. She walked straight to room 814 and stood in the doorway. Emily looked up from the chair beside the Admiral's bed. The woman looked at her, then at the man in the bed. Her face didn't move, but her eyes, something behind her eyes, collapsed. "I'm Margaret Cole," she said. "I'm his wife." Emily stood immediately. "Mrs. Cole, I'm Emily Carter. I've been caring for your husband on the night shift." "I know who you are." Margaret Cole walked to the bedside. She didn't touch him. She didn't cry. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at the monitors for a long time. Then she spoke in a voice so steady it hurt to hear. They told me he couldn't hear. They told me he was gone. That's why they said I couldn't visit. National security, restricted access. They said it would be too traumatic for me to see him like this. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. Just enough. He can hear you, Mrs. Cole, Emily said. He's been conscious since at least my second night with him, possibly since the beginning. Margaret looked at her husband. She leaned down close to his face. Nate, it's Margaret. The heart monitor jumped. Not 6 beats, not 8, 12 full beats above baseline. The most dramatic response Emily had seen in 4 days. Margaret put her hand on his cheek. I'm here. I know you're in there. I've always known. His heart rate held at 70 for a full 10 seconds before beginning a slow, controlled descent back to resting. Margaret straightened up. She turned to Emily, and now her face was different. The grief was still there, but it was armored in something harder, something that looked a lot like fury. I called the Inspector General, Margaret said. Emily's mouth opened. No sound came out. 3 days ago, after they refused to let me see my husband, I contacted a friend at the Department of Justice, a woman I've known for 30 years. I told her what was happening. She made a phone call. You triggered the investigation, Emily said. I triggered a question. Your report triggered the investigation. When the IG's office saw a federal anomaly report filed by a nurse at the same hospital where a military officer was being held without family access, they connected the dots. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. This morning at 4 a.m., my attorney received a copy of the JAG transfer order. It was filed hours before your evaluation proved Nate is conscious, which means someone at the Pentagon was trying to move him before anyone could find out the truth. Halbrook, Emily said. Halbrook, Margaret confirmed. He came to my home the day after the crash. He sat in my living room. He held my hand and told me my husband was never going to wake up. He said I should start preparing for the worst. He said it with tears in his eyes. She paused. Her jaw tightened. He's been lying from the first minute, and I think he's been lying about more than the prognosis. At 10:05 a.m., Dr. Catherine Marsh arrived from Johns Hopkins. She was a small woman with round glasses and a messenger bag stuffed with equipment that looked like it belonged in a research lab. She didn't waste time with introductions. She walked into room 814, set up her equipment, and looked at Dr. Weston. Brief me, she said. Dr. Weston gave her a 5-minute summary. The crash, the coma diagnosis, the imaging, Emily's observations, the finger movement at 5:53 a.m. Dr. Marsh listened, then turned to Emily. You documented 47-minute cardiac cycles? Yes, consistent across 3 consecutive nights. That's not random autonomic fluctuation, that's behavioral pacing. It's a technique used in survival training to maintain physiological control during extended immobilization. She looked at the Admiral's chart. This man was a SEAL commander? 32 years, Emily said. Then he's doing exactly what he was trained to do. He's regulating his own nervous system to simulate the appearance of deep unconsciousness while maintaining full awareness. She shook her head. I've read about this in military medical literature. I've never seen it in a clinical setting. Dr. Marsh began her evaluation at 10:15 a.m. She ran a battery of tests that Emily had never seen before. Targeted nerve stimulation at specific dermatomes. Sequential verbal commands with timed response windows. Eye movement tracking under closed lids using a portable infrared sensor. At 10:32 a.m., she got her first definitive result. Admiral Cole, she said firmly, I'm going to count to 3. On 3, I want you to move your eyes to the left under your closed eyelids. 1, 2, 3. The infrared sensor registered a clear lateral eye movement. Left, held for 2 seconds, returned to center. Dr. Marsh repeated the test with a rightward command. Same result, perfect compliance. At 10:48 a.m., she tested communication. Admiral Cole, I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. 1 finger movement for yes, 2 for no. Do you understand? 1 finger lift, clear, deliberate. Are you in pain? 2 finger lifts, no. Do you know where you are? 1 lift, yes. Do you know who injured you? 1 lift, yes. Dr. Marsh looked at Emily. Emily looked at Margaret, who was standing in the corner with her hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Can you tell us the name? Dr. Marsh asked. I'll recite the alphabet. Lift your finger at the correct letter. She began. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. His finger lifted. H, Dr. Marsh said. She continued. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R. His finger lifted. Dr. Marsh wrote it down. She continued through 6 more agonizing rounds of the alphabet. Each letter took nearly a minute. Each finger lift cost the Admiral visible effort. His heart rate climbed with each cycle, the strain of forcing a single digit to obey a brain that was fighting through genuine neurological damage. At 11:14 a.m., Dr. Marsh read the letters aloud. H, A, L, B, R, O, O, K. Halbrook. Margaret Cole sat down in the chair. She pressed both hands to her face. Her shoulders shook once, twice. Then she went still. Dr. Marsh turned to Dr. Voss. This patient is fully conscious, cognitively intact, and has just identified his attacker by name through a verified, locked-in syndrome communication protocol. I'll have my formal report filed within 2 hours. At 11:30 a.m., Richard Halbrook's car pulled into the hospital parking garage. He rode the elevator to the ICU floor. He stepped out and saw the 2 U.S. Marshals standing outside room 814. He stopped walking. He looked at the Marshals. He looked down the hallway at Dr. Voss, who was standing near the nurse's station with a phone to her ear. He looked at the closed door of room 814. Then he turned around and walked back to the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. One of the Marshals spoke into his radio. Subject is leaving the building. East elevator. Parking level 2. Halbrook never made it to his car. 2 FBI agents were waiting at the garage entrance. They had a federal warrant issued 45 minutes earlier, based on the Inspector General's preliminary findings and the clinical evidence from Dr. Marsh's evaluation. Richard Halbrook was detained at 11:42 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, exactly 6 days and 12 hours after the crash he had engineered on Route 110. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He straightened his tie, placed his hands behind his back, and let them put the cuffs on. Back in room 814, Emily Carter stood at the bedside and looked at the heart monitor. 58 beats per minute. Steady. Calm. The same number it had been every night she had sat in that chair. But now she understood what that number meant. It wasn't the rhythm of a man who was unconscious. It was the rhythm of a man who had held himself perfectly still through 5 days of darkness, 5 days of threats, 5 days of being trapped inside his own body, with no way to know if anyone would ever notice he was still alive. And he had held on, beat by beat, breath by breath, 47 minutes at a time. Emily looked at his face. His eyes were closed. His expression hadn't changed, but she would have sworn for just a moment that the corner of his mouth moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm, something closer to the beginning of a smile that he didn't have the strength to finish. She leaned down one last time. You can rest now, Admiral. We've got you. The monitor held steady. 58, 58, 58. And for the first time in 6 days, that number felt like peace. The FBI took Halbrook to a federal holding facility in Alexandria at 12:15 p.m. He requested a lawyer before the car door closed. By 1 p.m., 3 attorneys from the most expensive defense firm in Washington were sitting in an interview room waiting for him. By 2 p.m., they had already filed a motion to suppress any evidence gathered from Georgetown Memorial Hospital on the grounds that the patient's communication had not been independently verified by a military physician. The legal machinery moved fast, but the truth was already out of the building. At 2:30 p.m. that same afternoon, Dr. Catherine Marsh submitted her formal evaluation to the Office of the Inspector General, the Department of Justice, and the hospital's legal department simultaneously. 14 pages, detailed, irrefutable, every test documented, every response cataloged, every metric cross-referenced with established diagnostic criteria for locked-in syndrome. Her conclusion was one sentence long. Admiral Nathaniel Cole is fully conscious, cognitively intact, and capable of voluntary communication through established clinical protocols. That one sentence detonated like a bomb inside the Pentagon. By 3 p.m., 4 separate investigations had been launched. The FBI opened a criminal inquiry into the crash. The Department of Defense Inspector General opened an internal review of the transfer order. The Senate Armed Services Committee demanded a classified briefing. And the hospital's legal team began assembling a file on every unauthorized visit Holbrook had made to room 814. Emily Carter was still on the ICU floor when all of this happened. She hadn't gone home. Her shift had ended at 7 a.m., nearly 8 hours ago, but she hadn't left the building. She couldn't. Not yet. She sat in the break room with a cold cup of coffee and her phone in her hand, watching the news notifications roll in one after another. Pentagon official detained in connection with Admiral's crash. Navy SEAL commander may have been conscious during coma diagnosis. Hospital nurse files report that triggers federal investigation. Her name wasn't in the articles yet, but it would be. She knew that. She had known it the moment she pressed submit on that federal anomaly report 4 nights ago. At 3:45 p.m., Donna Briggs found her in the break room. "You need to go home," Donna said. "I know. You've been here for 20 hours. I know that too." Donna sat down across from her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Emily didn't expect. "I told you not to get curious." Emily looked up. "I was wrong," Donna said. "I've been running this ICU for 19 years and I missed it. Every nurse on this floor missed it. The doctors missed it. I told you to stay in your lane and do your job. And if you had listened to me, that man would be in a military facility right now where no one would ever test him, no one would ever listen, and he would spend the rest of his life locked inside his own body." Donna's voice broke on the last 3 words. She cleared her throat and straightened up. "Go home, Emily. Sleep. Come back tomorrow. He's safe now." Emily drove home at 4 p.m. She made it to her apartment, locked the door, sat down on the edge of her bed, and cried for 20 minutes. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, from the release of a tension she had been carrying for 4 days without letting it show. She had held herself together in front of Holbrook, in front of the attorney, in front of the administrator, in front of everyone. She had been steady and precise and clinical when every nerve in her body was screaming. Now, alone, she let it go. She fell asleep at 4:30 p.m. and didn't wake up until 6 a.m. the next morning. When she checked her phone, she had 47 missed calls. 12 were from reporters. 8 were from numbers she didn't recognize. 3 were from Dr. Weston. 2 were from the hospital administrator's office. 1 was from an attorney at the Department of Justice. And 1 was from Margaret Cole. She called Margaret first. "Mrs. Cole, it's Emily." "Emily, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." "I'm sorry, I was asleep. What's happening?" "They're letting me stay with him. The marshals are still here. Dr. Marsh is running more tests today. But Emily, something happened last night, after you left." Emily sat up straight. "What happened?" He opened his eyes. Emily stopped breathing. Not all the way, not for long, but at 9 p.m., while I was sitting beside him, his eyelids opened. Halfway. He looked at me, Emily. He looked right at me for about 4 seconds. Then they closed again. Emily pressed her hand to her chest. She could feel her heart hammering against her palm. Did anyone else see it? The night nurse, she documented it, and the marshals confirmed they witnessed it from the doorway. He's coming back, Emily said. He's fighting his way back. Margaret's voice wavered. Emily, I need you to know something. Before all of this, before the crash, Nate was worried. He had been worried for weeks. He wouldn't tell me details. He said it was classified. But 3 days before the accident, he came home from a meeting at the Pentagon and sat in the kitchen for an hour without speaking. When I asked him what was wrong, he said one thing. What did he say? He said, they're going to try to remove me from the equation. And when they do, I need someone to notice. Emily felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. He knew. He knew something was coming. He didn't know exactly what, but he was prepared for it. And Emily, I think the reason he survived that crash the way he did, the reason he was able to stay conscious and control his vitals and wait for someone to find him, is because he had already decided that if they came for him, he would endure it, whatever it took. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about those first nights in room 814, the perfect heart rate, the 47-minute cycles, the discipline it must have taken to lie in that bed, paralyzed, listening to the man who tried to kill him whisper threats, and hold every beat of his heart in check. He didn't just survive the crash, Emily said quietly. He weaponized it. Margaret was silent for a moment. What do you mean? He knew if he walked away from the crash uninjured, they would try again. Something more permanent. But a man in a coma is a man who can't testify, but also can't be killed without raising suspicion. He became untouchable by becoming invisible. He let them think they won, Margaret said, and he waited. At 8 a.m., Emily returned to the hospital. She expected chaos. Instead, she found quiet. The ICU floor was operating normally. The marshals were still posted outside room 814. Dr. Marsh was inside with 2 assistants running additional neurological assessments. Emily badged in and walked toward the room. The marshal on the left nodded at her. "Morning, Miss Carter." She stopped. He knew her name. Federal marshals posted at a hospital door knew her name. "Morning," she said, and walked in. Admiral Cole was propped up slightly in the bed. Not fully upright, but the head of the bed had been elevated 15 degrees. The ventilator was still connected, but Dr. Marsh had added a secondary breathing assessment device that measured his independent respiratory effort. "He's initiating breaths above the ventilator rate," Dr. Marsh told Emily without looking up from her tablet. 6 independent breaths per hour yesterday, 14 this morning. His brainstem function is recovering faster than any model I've seen for this level of injury. "Because the injury wasn't as severe as the imaging suggested?" Emily asked. Dr. Marsh shook her head. "No, the injury was real. The swelling was genuine. But I've reviewed his military medical file. This man has been through SEER training 3 times. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. The advanced course includes prolonged sensory deprivation, physiological control under extreme stress, and techniques for maintaining cognitive function during physical incapacitation." She turned to Emily. "He wasn't just lying there waiting to be found. He was running a survival protocol. His brain was injured, but his training kicked in at a level that's almost reflexive. He was managing his own nervous system the way a pilot manages an aircraft with one engine out. Controlled, deliberate, minute by minute. For 5 days, Emily said. For 5 days, Dr. Marsh confirmed. And if you hadn't noticed the pattern in his cardiac cycles, he might have done it for 5 months, or 5 years. That thought hit Emily harder than anything else she had heard in the past week.
5 years.
A man lying in a bed, fully aware, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to the world move on without him, hearing conversations about his prognosis, hearing the word vegetable, hearing the plans to transfer him to a facility where he would be forgotten. She looked at his face. His eyes were closed again, but the monitor showed something new. His heart rate was 56, 2 beats below his usual baseline. Dr. Marsh noticed it too. "He's relaxing," Dr. Marsh said. "For the first time since I've been here, his resting rate has actually dropped. He's letting go of some of the control." "He feels safe," Emily said. "He feels heard," Dr. Marsh corrected. At 10 a.m., 2 FBI agents arrived and asked to speak with Emily in the consultation room. Agent Diana Reeves was in her late 40s, with the kind of face that gave away nothing. Her partner, Agent Paul Kaufman, was younger, with a notebook he never seemed to stop writing in. Agent Reeves got straight to the point. "Miss Carter, you recorded a conversation between Deputy Secretary Holbrook and Admiral Cole on your personal phone during your first night shift with the patient. Is that correct?" "Yes." "We need that recording." Emily had expected this. She had thought about it all night. She knew the recording was the most critical piece of evidence in the entire case. Without it, Holbrook's lawyers could argue that the clinical evidence of consciousness was ambiguous, that Emily's observations were subjective, that the finger movements could have been reflex. But with the recording, there was no argument. A man standing over a bed confessing to sabotaging brakes while threatening a patient he believed couldn't hear him. That was attempted murder caught on audio. "I'll give you the recording," Emily said, "but I want something in return." Agent Reeves raised an eyebrow. "This is a federal investigation, Miss Carter. We can subpoena the recording." "I know, and I'll comply with a subpoena, but I'm asking you for something first." "What?" "Protection for Admiral Cole. Not just marshals at the door. Full federal witness protection until he's well enough to testify. Holbrook has attorneys. He has connections. He had access to a military transfer order within hours of my report. If he can reach that far from a holding cell, he can reach into a hospital room." Agent Reeves studied her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've had 4 days to think about nothing else. We can arrange enhanced security. I can't promise formal witness protection without the U.S. Attorney's approval, but I can tell you that the DOJ is taking this case very seriously. Holbrook is not the only person under investigation." Emily felt the floor tilt. "What do you mean?" Agent Kaufman flipped his notebook to a new page. "The crash was caused by electronic brake override sabotage. Our forensic engineers pulled the SUV's onboard computer. The brake system received a remote disable command at 11:41 p.m. on the night of the crash, 1 minute before impact." "Remote," Emily said. "Someone did it from a distance." "From a secure terminal. We're tracing the signal origin now, but the technology used to override the brake system isn't civilian. It's military grade, restricted access. The kind of hardware that requires authorization from someone with top-level defense clearance. Holbrook. Holbrook had the clearance, but he didn't have the technical capability. Someone else sent the command, someone who knew the Admiral's route, his departure time, and the exact specifications of his vehicle's electronic systems." Emily sat back in her chair. "There's a second person." "At minimum," Agent Reeves said, "this wasn't a one-man operation. Holbrook may have given the order, but someone built the weapon and someone pulled the trigger." At 11:30 a.m., Emily gave the FBI the recording. She logged into her cloud account on Agent Reeves's secured laptop and transferred the audio file. They listened to it together in the consultation room. Agent Kaufman stopped writing. Agent Reeves closed her eyes. Emily watched both of their faces change as Holbrook's voice filled the room. "I cut your brakes, Nate. I watched the crash footage 3 times, and I enjoyed it." When the recording ended, Agent Reeves opened her eyes and said, "This is going to bring down more than one man." At 1 p.m., Emily went back to room 814. Margaret was there, sitting in the chair Emily had occupied for 4 nights. She was holding the Admiral's hand, the one with the finger that had moved. "They told me about the recording," Margaret said. "The FBI played it for me. They had to. It's evidence in a case involving my husband." Emily didn't know what to say. She stood by the door and waited. "I sat in that room and listened to that man confess to trying to murder my husband while standing over his body. I heard him say he enjoyed it." Margaret's grip on the Admiral's hand tightened. Her knuckles went white. 31 years of marriage," Margaret said. "I've been through 4 deployments, 2 Purple Hearts, a phone call at 3 a.m. telling me he'd been shot in Fallujah and I should fly to Germany. I've sat in waiting rooms and hospital lobbies and military chapels praying to God to bring him home. And every time, the enemy was someone on the other side of the world, someone I could understand, someone fighting for their own country, their own cause." She looked at Emily. "This time the enemy sat in my living room and held my hand and told me to prepare for the worst. And he did it with tears in his eyes." Emily walked to the bedside. She looked at the monitor. 56. Steady. The Admiral was calm. He was listening, but he was calm. "Mrs. Cole, there's something else the FBI told me. The brake sabotage was done remotely using military-grade technology. Halbrook didn't act alone. There's at least one more person involved." Margaret's face hardened. "Who?" "They don't know yet. They're tracing the signal." Margaret looked at her husband. She leaned down close to his face. "Nate, they're looking for the second one. Do you know who it is?" Emily watched the monitor. The heart rate climbed. 58, 60, 62, 64. The highest she had ever seen it outside of Halbrook's direct presence. "He knows," Emily said. At 3 p.m., Dr. Marsh conducted another communication session. This time, she had refined the process. Instead of spelling letter by letter through the alphabet, she used a frequency-based letterboard, the kind designed for locked-in patients to communicate faster. "Admiral Cole, I'm going to point to groups of letters. Lift your finger when I point to the group containing the letter you want." It was still agonizingly slow, but faster than before. And the Admiral's motor control was improving. His finger lifts were stronger, more decisive, less tremor. At 3:47 p.m., he spelled his first complete sentence since the crash. "WEBB space IS space WITH space HIM." Dr. Marsh read it aloud. "Webb is with him." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Dr. Marcus Webb, the military neurologist who filed the telemedicine consult, the one who said there was no evidence of locked-in syndrome. Dr. Marsh looked at Dr. Weston, who had just walked in. The neurologist who cleared the transfer was part of it? "He never examined the patient," Emily said. "He signed a consult based on imaging alone, contradicting my report specifically to clear the transfer. He was covering for Halbrook." Dr. Weston picked up the phone and called Agent Reeves. The conversation lasted 2 minutes. When he hung up, his face was gray. "Webb has disappeared," he said. "His office at Walter Reed says he took personal leave this morning. His phone is off. His car is gone." Emily looked at the Admiral's hand. His finger was still raised slightly off the mattress, as if he had one more thing to say, but didn't have the strength to spell it. She moved to the bedside. "Admiral, is Webb the one who sent the brake override command?" One finger lift. "Yes." "Is there anyone else involved?" The finger hesitated, then lifted once. "Yes." "More than one?" One lift. "Yes." Emily looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Dr. Weston. Dr. Weston looked at the phone in his hand. "This is bigger than Halbrook," Emily said. "This is bigger than one man and one crash." At 4:30 p.m., the FBI issued a federal warrant for the arrest of Dr. Marcus Webb. His home was empty. His office had been cleared out. His military personnel file showed 30 years of service with commendations from 3 different defense secretaries. And his financial records, subpoenaed 2 hours earlier, showed a wire transfer of $1.2 million from an offshore account linked to a defense contractor called Meridian Strategic Systems, the same contractor that had bid on the $5 billion defense contract that Admiral Cole had opposed, the same contract that Holbrook had tried to force through, the same vote that had happened the night of the crash. Emily stood at the nurse's station at 5 p.m. and read the update on her phone. She put the phone down and looked through the glass at room 814. Margaret was sitting beside the bed, holding the Admiral's hand. The marshals were at the door. Dr. Marsh was documenting the afternoon's communication session, and in the bed, Admiral Nathaniel Cole lay still, eyes closed, heart rate 56, breathing 14 independent breaths per hour. A man who had been declared dead to the world 6 days ago was now the most important witness in what was shaping into the largest defense corruption case in a decade. He couldn't walk. He couldn't talk. He could barely move one finger on one hand. But he had already named 2 of his attackers from a hospital bed, using nothing but that single finger in the will to survive. Emily looked at the monitor one more time. 56 beats per minute, slower than his controlled baseline, calmer than she had ever recorded. She understood now what Dr. Marsh had said that morning. He wasn't just resting, he was gathering strength, conserving energy, preparing for what came next. Because Admiral Nathaniel Cole wasn't finished fighting. He had been trained to endure conditions that would break most human beings. He had survived the crash. He had survived the coma. He had survived Holbrook standing over him, whispering threats into his ear, while the rest of the world believed he was gone. And now, one letter at a time, one finger lift at a time, he was going to bring down every single person who had tried to bury him alive. The monitor beeped. 56, 56, 56. Steady as a heartbeat, steady as a man who had decided, lying in the dark, that he would live long enough to tell the truth. And now the truth had a voice. Barely. Just barely. But it was enough. They found Marcus Webb 48 hours later in a motel outside Richmond, Virginia. He hadn't run far. He hadn't run smart. A man who had spent 30 years in military medicine, who had the clearance to access classified neurological research, who had helped sabotage the brakes of a Navy Admiral's SUV using technology most people didn't know existed, had driven south on I-95 with his personal cell phone still turned on. The FBI picked up the signal at 2 a.m. on a Friday morning. By 2:45 a.m., 6 agents surrounded the building. By 3 a.m., Webb was in handcuffs, sitting on the edge of a motel bed in his undershirt, staring at the wall like a man who had been waiting to be caught. Agent Reeves called Emily at 6 a.m. "We got him." Emily was already awake. She had barely slept more than 4 hours a night since the investigation began. Her body was running on coffee and something deeper than caffeine, something she couldn't name but could feel in her chest every time she walked into room 814. "Did he talk?" Emily asked. "He hasn't stopped talking since we put him in the car. He's terrified, not of us, of the people above him." "Above Holbrook?" Agent Reeves paused. "Webb says Holbrook didn't give the order. Holbrook carried out the order. The directive came from someone inside Meridian Strategic Systems. Someone Webb says he never met face-to-face, only encrypted communications, dead drops, the kind of tradecraft you'd expect from intelligence operations, not defense contractors." Emily sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her fingers against her temples. So Meridian wanted the contract approved. Admiral Cole was the only vote standing in the way, and they used Holbrook to remove him. That's what Webb is claiming. He says Holbrook was compromised years ago. Financial entanglement. Meridian had been funneling money to Holbrook through shell companies since at least 2019. When Cole threatened to block the contract vote, Holbrook panicked. He went to his contacts at Meridian, and they gave him the solution. Kill the Admiral. Make it look like an accident. And if the accident didn't kill him, make sure he disappeared into a military facility where nobody would ever find out the truth. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about that first night in room 814, the perfect heart rate, the disciplined breathing, a man lying in the dark, alone, trapped, knowing exactly who had done this to him and having no way to tell a soul. Emily, Agent Reeves said, there's something else. Webb told us that the brake override wasn't a one-time device. It was installed in Cole's vehicle 6 weeks before the crash. They had the capability to kill him at any time. They chose that specific night because the contract vote was the next morning. If Cole died before the vote, the committee would have proceeded without his opposition. The contract would have passed. But he didn't die, Emily said. No, he didn't. And now, because of what you found, the entire program is unraveling. The DOJ has frozen Meridian's assets. The Senate Intelligence Committee has opened a classified investigation. And 3 more Pentagon officials have been placed on administrative leave, pending review of their financial connections to Meridian. Emily hung up and got dressed. She drove to the hospital in silence. No radio, no music, just the sound of the road and the weight of everything she now knew pressing against her chest like a second heartbeat. When she arrived at Georgetown Memorial at 7:30 a.m., something was different on the ICU floor. The marshals were still there, but they had been joined by 2 additional agents. The nurses' station was quieter than usual. Donna Briggs was standing by the window at the end of the hallway, looking out at the city with her arms crossed. Emily walked up to her. Donna, they took the ventilator out an hour ago, Donna said without turning around. Emily stopped walking. What? Dr. Marsh cleared it at 6 a.m. His independent respiratory rate hit 22 breaths per minute overnight. He's breathing on his own, Emily. Emily put her hand on the wall to steady herself. She had seen the numbers improving every day. 14 independent breaths, 18, 20. But hearing that the machine was gone, that the man who had been kept alive by a tube for 8 days was now breathing with his own lungs, hit her in a place that clinical data never reached. Can he speak? Emily asked. Not yet. His vocal cords are damaged from the intubation. Dr. Marsh says it could be days or weeks before he can produce speech. But he's mouthing words. Emily walked into room 814 at 7:40 a.m. Margaret was there, as she had been every day since the marshals let her in. She was sitting close to the bed, her chair pulled up so tightly that her knees pressed against the mattress. Admiral Cole was propped up at 30 degrees. The ventilator was gone. The breathing tube was gone. An oxygen cannula ran under his nose, but his chest was rising and falling on its own. His eyes were open, not halfway, not flickering, open, clear, focused. He was looking at Emily. She stopped in the doorway. For a moment, all the professional composure she had maintained for 8 days threatened to collapse. She had seen this man's heartbeat on a screen. She had whispered to him in the dark. She had fought for him against people with more power, more authority, more resources than she could have imagined. But she had never seen his eyes. Not really. Not like this. They were blue, pale blue, the kind of blue that looked like it had been bleached by years of sun and salt and things most people would never see. And they were steady, absolutely steady, the same way his heart rate had been steady every night she sat beside him. This was a man who held everything still, even the way he looked at someone. Emily walked to the bedside. Good morning, Admiral. He didn't speak. He couldn't, but his lips moved, slowly, deliberately, forming a single word with a kind of effort that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were watching. Thank you. Emily nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She looked at the monitor instead. Heart rate, 54, the lowest she had ever recorded. He was calm, truly calm. Not the manufactured calm of a man holding himself in check, but the genuine calm of a man who, for the first time in 8 days, felt safe enough to let his guard down. The FBI arrested Webb, Emily told him. He's cooperating. He's named Meridian Strategic Systems as the entity behind the crash. They're unraveling the entire network. His eyes moved to Margaret. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, weakly, but perceptibly. The first voluntary hand movement Emily had seen from him. Margaret's breath caught. She pressed her forehead against his hand and held it there. Over the next 2 weeks, Admiral Cole's recovery accelerated in ways that baffled even Dr. Marsh. His motor function returned incrementally but steadily. First the right hand, then the left, then his feet, then his arms. Each day brought a new movement, a new capability, another piece of the man reassembling itself inside a body that had been forced into stillness. On the 12th day after the ventilator was removed, he spoke. It was 6 a.m. Emily was on the night shift again. Margaret had gone home to sleep for the first time in days. The marshals were at the door. The floor was quiet. Emily was charting at the bedside when she heard it. A sound so faint it could have been the air conditioning. A whisper so thin it barely qualified as language. Emily. She looked up from the tablet. Admiral Cole was looking at her. His lips were cracked. His voice sounded like sandpaper dragged across concrete, but the word was unmistakable. Her name. "I'm here," she said. He swallowed. The effort it took was visible in his throat, in his jaw, in the tension around his eyes. "I need to tell you something. You don't have to talk yet. Save your strength." "I've been saving my strength for 8 days. The ghost of something that might have been humor crossed his face. "I need to say this now." Emily set the tablet down and leaned closer. "I didn't fight the crash," he said. Each word cost him. She could see it. "When the brakes failed, I knew. I knew it was Holbrook. I knew it was the contract. And I had about 4 seconds to make a decision." He paused. His breathing was labored but steady. "If I survived without injury, they would have tried again. Something quieter, something permanent. A man who walks away from an assassination attempt is a man who has to be killed properly. But a man in a coma is a problem that solves itself. They would wait. They would transfer me. They would let time do what the crash didn't." "So you chose not to swerve," Emily said. "I chose to take the hit. I let the airbag absorb what it could, and I let the impact do the rest. The brain injury was real. I couldn't fake that. But the depth of the coma was something I could control. Something I had trained for. The SEER training. 3 rounds of advanced survival protocol. They teach you to regulate your heart, your breathing, your neurological responses under extreme duress. They teach you to go still. To go so deep inside yourself that even your own nervous system believes you're gone." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. But they don't teach you what it's like to lie there for 5 days and not know if anyone will notice. They don't teach you what it feels like to hear the man who tried to kill you standing over your bed, telling you he enjoyed it and not be able to move a single muscle. They don't teach you the fear. Emily felt tears sliding down her face. She didn't wipe them away. "I heard everything," he said. "Every conversation, every whispered threat. Every time Holbrook walked into this room, I felt my body want to react, and I had to hold it down, beat by beat, breath by breath. Because if I flinched, if I showed anything, they would have known I was conscious, and the transfer would have happened that night. You waited for someone to find you. I waited for someone to look, to really look, not at the scans, not at the charts, at me." His eyes locked onto hers. "And you did." Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand. "You made it easy. Your vitals were too perfect. No coma patient runs a heart rate that clean." For the first time, Admiral Nathaniel Cole smiled. A real smile. Small, exhausted, but real. "I was hoping someone would be paying attention." "You were hoping," Emily said, "and I was watching." 4 months passed. The investigation expanded beyond anything Emily could have imagined. Meridian Strategic Systems was dismantled by federal order. Its CEO, a man named Lawrence Pratt, was indicted on 17 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, defense contract fraud, bribery of federal officials, and obstruction of justice. 14 Pentagon officials were placed under investigation. 8 resigned. 3 were arrested. Richard Holbrook pleaded not guilty. His trial was scheduled for the following spring. The evidence against him included Emily's audio recording, the hospital security footage, Dr. Marsh's clinical evaluation, Webb's testimony, financial records tracing over $6 million in payments from Meridian to Holbrook's shell companies, and the forensic analysis of the brake override system installed in Admiral Cole's vehicle. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty to conspiracy and agreed to testify against both Holbrook and Pratt in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony filled 47 pages. Admiral Cole spent 3 months in rehabilitation. The brain injury had been real, and the recovery was neither easy nor painless. There were days when he couldn't remember words. Days when his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a cup. Days when the frustration of being trapped inside a body that wouldn't obey him felt worse than the night of the crash. But he worked. Every day, every hour. The same discipline that had kept his heart rate at 58 beats per minute, while a man whispered murder into his ear, now drove him through physical therapy sessions that would have broken someone half his age. Margaret was beside him through every session. She didn't coddle him. She didn't tell him to rest when he wanted to push further. She knew who she had married, a man who didn't stop. 6 months after the crash, Admiral Nathaniel Cole testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He walked into the hearing room slowly, a cane in his right hand, his dress uniform pressed and immaculate, every medal in place, his shoes polished to a mirror finish. Margaret walked 2 steps behind him, exactly where she had walked at every military function for 31 years. The room was packed. Senators, attorneys, press, military officials. And in the public gallery, in the 3rd row, wearing scrubs because she had come straight from a 12-hour shift, was Emily Carter. Admiral Cole took his seat at the witness table. He adjusted the microphone. He looked at the committee chairman, a 70-year-old senator from Virginia who had served in the Army himself, and who was looking at Cole with the expression of a man who understood exactly what it cost to be sitting in that chair. Admiral Cole, the chairman said, "Before we begin your testimony, the committee would like to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances of your recovery and the individuals who contributed to preserving your safety. Is there anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" Cole looked at the microphone. Then he looked up, not at the senators, not at the cameras. He looked at the 3rd row of the gallery. "There is one thing," he said. His voice was still rough, still recovering, but it carried across that room like a command. 6 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to tell anyone that I was still alive. The people who put me there believed they had won. They believed I was gone. And by every medical measure available, I should have been." He paused. The room was completely silent. But a 26-year-old nurse on her 9th week in the ICU sat down beside my bed, looked at a heart monitor, and saw something that 6 senior physicians, 3 military doctors, and the Deputy Defense Secretary of the United States did not see. His voice cracked. He stopped. He pressed his hand flat on the table and took a breath. She saw that I was still in there, and she fought for me when fighting meant risking everything she had. He looked directly at Emily. "Miss Carter, I owe you my life, not because you saved me medically, because you refused to look away." Emily sat in the gallery with tears running down her face and her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't stand. She didn't wave. She just nodded once, the same way she had nodded on that first night in room 814 when she had seen the heart monitor flicker and known with absolute certainty that the man in that bed was alive. Cole testified for 4 hours. He detailed the contract, the opposition, the threats, the crash, the 5 days in the bed. Every word was measured. Every sentence was precise. The same discipline, the same control, the same man. When it was over, the chairman called a recess. The room erupted in noise. Press shouted questions. Attorneys huddled. Senators spoke in low voices. Admiral Cole stood up from the table. He picked up his cane. He turned away from the committee and walked toward the gallery. People moved aside. Cameras followed. He didn't look at any of them. He stopped in front of Emily Carter. She stood up. They faced each other. A 61-year-old admiral with a cane and a tremor in his left hand. A 26-year-old nurse in hospital scrubs with mascara streaked across her cheeks. He released the cane. It clattered against the bench. He straightened his spine with a kind of effort that only someone who understood what his body had been through could appreciate. And he lifted his right hand to his brow. A salute. Not the quick, casual kind that officers exchange in hallways. A full, deliberate, parade ground salute held for 5 long seconds. Emily didn't know what to do. She wasn't military. She had never been saluted in her life. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Margaret Cole, standing behind her husband, whispered, "Just let him." Emily stood still. She let him hold the salute. She let the cameras flash and the room fall quiet, and the moment stretch until it filled every corner of that hearing room. Then Admiral Cole lowered his hand. He looked at Emily, and his eyes said everything his voice had already spoken, and 1,000 things more. "You watch the monitors," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You waited for the truth to move." "It only had to move a millimeter," she said. He smiled. The same small, exhausted, real smile she had seen in room 814 on the morning the ventilator came out. "A millimeter was enough," he said. Margaret stepped forward and put her arms around Emily. She held her tightly, the way a mother holds someone, and whispered into her ear, "Thank you for bringing him back to me." Emily hugged her back. She held on. She let herself hold on. Then she stepped away, picked up her bag, and walked out of the hearing room. She had a shift in 3 hours. There were patients in the ICU who needed someone to watch their monitors. Behind her, Admiral Nathaniel Cole picked up his cane and stood with his wife. The cameras kept flashing. The senators kept talking. The investigation would continue for months. Trials would follow. Sentences would be handed down. The defense procurement system would be reformed, reorganized and scrutinized in ways it hadn't been in decades. But all of that was noise. The truth of what happened in room 814 at Georgetown Memorial Hospital came down to something quieter. A man who refused to die, a woman who refused to stop watching, and a single heartbeat, one flicker on a monitor in the middle of the night that said what no words could. "I'm still here." Because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it lies perfectly still and waits for the one person brave enough to notice. And the most powerful person in any room is never the one giving orders, or making threats, or signing transfer papers. It's the one sitting quietly in the chair, reading the numbers, trusting what she sees, and refusing to look away. That's the person who changes everything.